found a video called The Role of a Producer in Games Development, The Good and the Bad, not made by a producer, made by an animation director. So going to be reacting to it, going through it. This is by Harvey Newman.
So today, we're going to take a look at the role of a producer in video games. Is a role that is incredibly important in games, especially at a AAA level,
Thank you, sir.
but sometimes can be problematic. And my view is that they can be either very, very good or very, very bad for production, depending on how studios use them. And pretty much every single studio that I've been in, they use them in different ways. And I'm going to try and break down how they are.
Everything he's describing, both the ability to be very, very good or very, very bad, I think speaks to the role of producer as leader, where you are force multipliers, I've often described it. So if you manage to be a multiplier on a team, you get to be someone who 2x's, 3x's the team or something like that. It's insanely valuable. But you can also be not like a really bad multiplier. You can be like a 0.1 or a 0.2 if you're not doing your job well. And so your ability to have scaled impact is much broader because of the nature of the role and it being a core leadership role, and the fact that you tend to be over larger chunks of the organization. You're not an individual contributor with one small thing. You're like, I'm hopefully helping, but also potentially really inhibiting something like 10, 20 people all at the same time. And if I'm doing a really bad job, I can really muck things up. I think the other thing that just makes me chuckle a little bit, because I've been saying this for a long time, there is no industry standard view of what a game producer is. And so every studio you go to, it's slightly different. And it seems like he's experienced that on the animation side as well.
That I've been in, they use them in different ways. And I'm going to try and break down how they are used, some of the good, some of the bad, and ultimately how the industry should move forward from my perspective when it comes to production and getting games to be finished on time with no crunch, because that is essentially what production is there to do. So
it's a claim. Is production there to get games to the finish with no crunch? I don't think so. Or I would say that is not all of their job. And I would not define their job that way. Because that focuses in on schedule, capacity, planning, these sorts of things. And I think denies some of the leadership aspects. And this could just be a difference of what do we see as a production role. As I just said, a lot of different potential definitions of that. But for me, I don't want to limit it to, we took care of the schedule. I want producers to see themselves as leaders who are thinking about that goal and helping other people move towards the goal. And if we get to the end of the runway, get to the launch date, get to whatever, and we've successfully built the game without crunching, but the game sucks, or there are a bunch of other issues on the team, we're not ready to continue on, like whatever it is, I view those as production failures, even though from that simple definition, you might say they succeeded. And so I think his definition is, it's not wrong, it's incomplete. So yeah.
And with no crunch, because that is essentially what production is there to do. So without further ado, let's get to it. All right, so welcome to another video. If you are new here, my name is Harvey Newman. I like to share my passion for animation, the games industry, and much, much more here in this video with all of you. Now, production is a very, very crucial part of game making. And the reason why is this. The game needs to actually follow a certain schedule. That schedule needs to be delivered on time. There's a lot of money being put into games. And then somebody needs to make sure that the ship is actually not only sailing at the right speed, but also making sure that it hits certain deadlines and making sure that everybody feels at peace with where we're heading and making sure that we finish the game within a certain deadline.
So the ship moving and moving at the right speed, yes, I think I like to include the idea that production plays a role in the direction of that, and also in viewing the ship not just as the game, but as the studio, the team, the culture, the processes we use, and keeping all of that stuff moving in the right direction at the right speed. He's focusing on the production as project manager, as somebody who keeps track of the schedule and makes sure we're going in the right direction, make sure we're hitting our milestones, make sure we're, completing the roadmap stuff on time. Yes, certainly that's part of it. I don't like that being all of it. I think that's actually not as useful of a producer when they focus too much in there. But that seems to be where he's driving. So we'll see where this keeps going.
Thing and making sure that we finish the game within a certain deadline. Games are not an exact science, at least not yet. And every single studio works in a different way. And everybody's trying to figure out exactly how to make their games. Now, if you have been a studio that have been publishing games for many years, you have a pipeline, you have a set of tools, and you have a set of gameplay mechanics that you can pull from so you can then create another game. So let's say a game like...
Sort of. You have to be careful about that assumption, even in the AAA space. Yes, you might have some type of a tool chain set up, like an engine tool chain around that. You probably have a lot of standards of how you get things done, and then you may have previous games to pull from. This applies more if you're always playing in the same space, which again can be very wise to stay inside of your expertise. You also have to be careful here, though, because sometimes your stuff gets obsolete, and reusing, for example, gameplay mechanics over and over and over. I mean, sometimes that's fine. A lot of games have something like an inventory system that is fairly understood by gamers. But I have seen enough projects, even large ones in the AAA space or with AAA size budgets, where this stuff was not in place. To just say this is sometimes true, and especially if you're making a sequel to a game and you're using the same engine or whatever, it's probably true. But just it is an assumption, and it's one worth calling out, because many people, even in larger environments, well-funded environments, might not have this yet.
Mechanics that you can pull from so you can then create another game. So let's say a game like Battlefield. They have been doing Battlefield for many years. There's a lot of legacy when it comes to the tools and the pipelines and the schedules, and they know more or less how long a game takes, right? So they can pick up on that formula, on that model, and then go this new game should last more or less this long. But as everyone knows, no matter what game it is, there is delays, there's cancellations, and there's more delays, and everybody blames the developers. However, I think the problem is much bigger than just blaming developers.
Completely agree. Everybody does often try to say, well, the team didn't get done what they were supposed to. And how are we going to account for that when it's actually, we didn't make hard decisions that we should have made as leaders earlier on? And by the way, I do view that at least partially as a production responsibility.
I think the problem is much bigger than just blaming developers, because what happens through the course of a game is that things change, and they change a lot. And part of it is because games take a long time to develop, and the other part is that the game is not finished until it's finished. So you're trying to figure out, doesn't matter how much pre-production you do, meaning doesn't matter how much time you spend planning the game, that when you get into production, full production, which means that we're just making the game now, we're still trying to figure out a bunch of stuff, and there's going to be a lot of curveballs that are going to come your way that you're going to have to sort out in certain ways.
I would go a step further. So I don't like thinking about pre-production as planning per se, although that will be part of it. It's more pre-production is us validating that this game idea, we think we can scale it, we think we can build it, that we have the capacity to do that. That we'll be able to hire the people, that the budget will be there for it. And so, yes, a lot of that does involve planning, but a lot of it's still asking product questions around, we think there's an audience for this, and we think that our capability to build whatever this is will be successfully realized if we are to go into production. There's a lot of questions you're still asking. I also like to not think about it as step change development, where you're in pre-production and you're doing all the planning, or you're figuring maybe in, a really step changey version of this is when you're doing prototyping or proof of concept or ideation. That's when we figure out what the game is and we answer all the questions, and we're asking all the big, who will this be for, and all this different stuff. And then we go into pre-production, and that's when we plan and we figure out our pipelines and things like that. And again, some of this is true, but you actually keep doing smaller versions sometimes, but still learning what you were doing in ideation and pre-production. And if you stop and you go like, no, we only do planning in these things, you're going to miss a bunch of stuff. And then that same thing happens when you go into production. If production is just execution of the game, if that's how you view it, you're going to lose a lot of value. You're going to leave a lot of value on the table because you're not learning as you continue to develop and as you continue to put the game in front of people. So one of the ways that I've liked to frame this is instead of it being like I'm in ideation and then I step change into pre-production and then I step change into production, with each of those being very distinct from each other, it's more like there are waves. And I start off and I'm primarily inside the wave of concepting or ideation or whatever you want to call that early phase. And then as that wave, like prototyping, as that wave starts to come down, the wave of pre-production starts picking up. And then I might be doing that for a bit, but I'm still kind of finishing up usually some of the concept ideations type work, even though I'm in pre-production, probably throughout pre-production. And then somewhere in pre-production, I also start doing the wave of production because some things start locking in and I start going like, okay, well, assuming this all continues to go reasonably well, right? Then I can actually start getting ahead on getting some stuff done in a production mentality. You got to be really careful there because you don't want to rush to production. But I think some of that's normal and acceptable. And in fact, what that means is that you might have an overlapping time period where some of the project is in concepting, most of it's in pre-production, and some of it's in production all at the same time. And that doesn't mean anything's wrong, assuming you actually understand where the game is at, what are the major questions you're trying to answer, and what it means for that to be successful. So I like waves here as a better analogy than like I'm step changing between these things. But anyway, yeah. Tangent.
A lot of curveballs that are going to come your way that you're going to have to sort out in certain ways. Now, how does that all...
Oh, that was the other thing I wanted to say. Yes. Tons of curveballs, tons of surprises, tons of things, and that will continue. And ideally, they become less and less disruptive as you go on. But you always need to have a process that deals with them. The idea that we're in production, so now all we need to do is execute a plan, is a great way to ruin a game. You need to continue to be learning about that game, and you need to be open to what devs are realizing, and continue to put that game in front of players and see what's happening with it. Otherwise, you're much more likely, by the time you get to the end, to like ship something no one likes, or not even get to the end because you weren't paying attention to how the game was breaking, based on bad assumptions you made that you weren't learning from.
Your way that you're going to have to sort out in certain ways. Now, how does that all connect to production? Production's work is to make sure that everybody's on time, everybody is making their tasks on time, and the ship, once again, is going to a certain place at a certain speed and making sure that everybody's at peace about getting there. Now, the problem is that because of all these changes...
Make sure everybody's on time and on track. I like to describe this differently. So here he did say the ship is going to a place at a certain speed. And so I appreciate him adding in like, we're going to the place. There's a place we're trying to go. There's a goal state that we have, and production has a responsibility to keep us moving towards that goal state. That's actually the most important thing. As a producer, it was an interesting moment for me when I realized my job is not coordinating the process or facilitating meetings or taking notes or running the schedule or doing the planning. It's actually making sure everybody in my sphere of influence, not just those that are on the teams that I might be the team producer of or something like that, but everybody that I can influence, that we're all moving towards the same goal. So much of my job is about aligning people to move in the same direction together. Everything I build comes back to that idea. How do I get all of these people moving mostly the right direction most of the time? Working on high value things that will get us there. That's what I'm trying to do. And that's what a producer's job is. And that's why they are not individual contributors in the code. That can actually distract them, because if they go into the details, if they go into the weeds too much, they will not, it'll be harder for them. Some people can do this. Some people, you can usually have people that'll operate between two layers and kind of do okay. But it's better to be operating at one and to be like, what is the big picture? How do I help us all continue to move in the right direction? So I don't like this framing of make sure everyone is on time and on track. Even though there are certainly elements of what you do where you're keeping track of this from a risk management and a planning and a scheduling perspective, because it is part of your job. But it's It's not the main part of your job. The main part of your job is maintaining alignment of everybody and movement towards the goal. Like that everybody is able to move, that they have the information they need to move towards the goal effectively. So difference here between him and I in terms of framing.
Sure that everybody's at peace about getting there. Now, the problem is that because of all these changes that are happening in the background, and because a game takes a good 3 to 5 years to make, there's so many changes that if you're not careful, they compound over time.
Mm-hmm.
By the time that you hit your 3-year deadline or 5-year deadline, you might be way behind of where you were in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't actually envy anybody in production because they are always in a really tough place. They are always between a rock and a hard place all the time. So either the work is actually being done on time, and now people want to pile more work because if you're doing so well, then let's pile more work on top, or the work is not getting done on time. So what's going wrong? What's happening? What is broken? How can you guys fix it? It's your job as production to fix it. You should have flagged this earlier. You should have done this. You should have done that. And poor producers, they are running around like headless chickens trying to actually make sure that everybody does their job at the correct time, as fast as possible, and as well as possible.
Does this sound familiar? You're in a leadership role at a game studio. Everyone is busy working. No one has any time. But the actual game itself isn't in a good spot. Maybe it's the tech. Maybe it's the lack of a validated prototype. Maybe it's that every person seems to have a different idea about what we're trying to build. But you've got a job. There are reports to send, meetings to schedule and facilitate, the occasional season of performance reviews to go through. And everyone is always so busy. When you step back, it makes you wonder if everyone is just going to keep slowly walking towards the abyss until the project or game fails. Is this what it means to be a leader in games? In tech? To endlessly repeat the same sequence of meetings without really moving the needle? To spend hours trying to get Jira tickets and dashboards where they should be? To pretend that everything is fine when you know deep down it really isn't? It doesn't have to be this way. You can make a difference. You can help your team and game succeed, but sometimes you need a bit of help to get there. I've started a game dev leadership accelerator. It aims to level up leaders who see opportunities to make a difference but don't know how to capitalize on them. We'll walk through what it means to lead well and give you tools to understand your organization's challenges and implement changes to overcome them. Game dev is hard. Knowing how to lead will give you an edge. It will still be hard, but you'll be ready to tackle it. If you're interested, let me know below. Hit the link. I hope to see you in the accelerator because I believe better leaders will help teams make better games, and I look forward to someday playing what you create. It's funny. Everything you just said is so resonant, and I think speaks to some misunderstanding or some dysfunctional connections between different parts of the organization. But it reminds me of when I was on a content creation team, and we were producing content every couple of weeks, and it was pretty high profile. And I just remember wearing out the stairs because I was on the 3rd floor, and the release team and the build team was on the 2nd floor, and some of the other supporting teams. And my job as a producer, I just spent so much time, running up and down those stairs trying to figure out how are we going to get this next piece of content out. What's interesting is as I got better at the job and as that organization matured, I did less of that running around to try to solve everything at the last minute and more of the anticipating and actually not even anticipating the risks or the problems, but working with people around me who also got better, by the way. The whole organization was improving at this, to set up an environment where just things were less likely to go wrong. And you don't start there. You start, I think, running up and down the stairs. But anyway, everything you just said, like, I just so relatable. It's like, oh, you're going too slow. It's like, well, wait, how do we know we're going too slow? What does it mean to go too slow? Well, you're not hitting the timelines. Well, were the timelines reasonable? We don't get to ask that question. We just assume that they were, even though in the history of game dev, I've never really seen one that was. We just assumed that the timeline was reasonable and something must be wrong with the team. Again, coming back to his thing at the beginning of like the devs are failing or something like that. And so anyway, yeah, so much there that's resonant.
Now, all artists, coders, and people that are doing their job in games, normally, depending on the studio, there is this love and hate relationship with production.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that comes from if a studio has had delays over time, over many years, over many projects, there's a certain sense as a developer that as you are doing your animations, as you are heading towards a goal, you kind of have this anticipation that something is going to fall off the wagon or something is going to break. And it's going to be production that didn't told you what to do when you had to do it. And they didn't really kind of like have the transparency to kind of tell you the things. So there's almost two layers to this. There's the developers and then there's the producers on top, right? Or below, depending on how it is. Now, when I actually had a look at the animation state of the industry, which was basically this survey that I showcased with you guys last week, when it came to a survey by a lot of animators on the things that are going well, the things that are going badly, the number one problem people found is that people felt very strongly in this survey about production, and most people felt that when production is involved in a project very closely with animation at least, things normally don't go as well as when producers are not involved, right? Almost hinting at that we don't need production in animation because it's better not to have production.
I'm not surprised. And actually, I want to come back to something you said earlier that I thought about, but I forgot. He said something like, people are on track, the ship is going in the right direction, and we're at peace. I think, again, there's truth in that, because one of the things that leaders do, and I view producers definitionally as leaders, they create stability in the midst of the chaos of game development. They make it, they do relieve anxiety if they're doing their job well, because there's somebody there who's looking out and seeing the bigger problems and identifying them if they're doing their jobs well. But there's also a bad way to do that, which is to pretend the uncertainty doesn't exist. And if you, as a producer, go and just say, well, we don't have a good answer to this, so I'm just going to make something up so that I seem like a confident leader and the team is happy, that's going to backfire on you, and it will long-term undermine trust. And I've seen people do all kinds of political maneuvering and like communication and influence management to try to get out of the fact. And sometimes they're successful and sometimes they're not. And they start like pushing blame around and things like that when stuff goes wrong. But that core idea, I wanted to make everybody feel better. So I provided a fake picture of the world. I made everybody feel more confident than they should have been in what was going on, versus the producer that acknowledges that things are uncertain, that we're not sure what's going to happen, that we don't know everything that's going on, and still says, and you know what, that's okay because we're going to get through it, and then leads in the midst of that uncertainty. That is the more effective producer. That is the one that also, when things do go crazy, isn't suddenly caught because like, oh, you said this wasn't going to be a problem and now it is, or whatever it might be. But it's, these are the things we expect, so let's move forward. And if you expect something to be difficult, it's more okay than if you don't. You know, imagine being on an airplane and you're flying along and the pilot comes on and says like, hey, in about 10 minutes, we're going to hit some turbulence. And 2 minutes before, hey, in about 2 minutes, we're going to hit the turbulence. And then you hit the turbulence. You're sort of like, okay, they knew it was coming. Versus out of nowhere, there's just a bunch of turbulence on the airplane. You're much more disconcerted by the suddenness of it. And so sometimes the leader's job is to know that turbulence is coming and not to say, don't worry, there won't be turbulence. I'll get that all out of your way, or we solved that, or don't worry, I did something special, there won't be anything. And then when you hit turbulence, you're very disrupted. You're very disconcerted, confused, a little bit mistrustful, suspicious of what's going on. Versus the producer who is giving you warning, like, hey, yeah, just so you know, like some stuff is going to happen. And I'm not going to say it's all okay because some of it's going to suck. But we're going to move through it. And like, it's part of game dev and don't worry about it. This is what we're here to do. And I'm going to help. Like that is a much stronger stance to take, again, depending on culture and team members and things like that. So people might get really annoyed by like, wait, you're supposed to know everything, if that's the false idea that they have about a producer. So anyway, as he was just describing this, came to mind for me. There's healthy and unhealthy ways to deal with that uncertainty. And if you choose the unhealthy ones, they tend to be short-term beneficial, mid-long-term bad. And so you want to be aware of that as a producer, and you want to pick the healthy ways to help teams handle the uncertainty and volatility that come with being in game development. I also think his example of like animation pipelines is like, hey, there was the strong idea that when producers were involved, things were worse, and when they weren't, things were better. I'm like, you know what? He might be right. That might be what actually happened. Maybe there were producers that really weren't adding value in those environments because they weren't framing the job right. They weren't doing what they should have been doing.
That we don't need production in animation because it's better not to have production. I don't think necessarily that's true. I think when a project is of a certain scope, when you have 500 people working on one project, you really need a production layer to make sure that everything gets done on time. Perhaps the disconnection there about thinking that when production is involved, things don't go so well is depending on the size of the studio, but also depends on the knowledge of production of the role that they're actually producing for.
Yeah.
Unlike film or unlike VFX, the producers in games, because games is such a new industry, at least from my experience, normally don't understand what the team that they are taking care of is working on. So just to backtrack a little bit, producers normally take care of a team. There's many producers happening, and they go like, this is the producer for animation or producers for art, and they take care of a bunch of different people. This is the producer for coding or engineering, and they take care of a bunch of people. So there's more than one producer in each team, and then they actually report to the head of production, right? And then the head of production now pulls the strings and finds out what's going right, what's going wrong, if there's a problem with a certain employee or a certain department, and all these things. Now,
so he's describing a disciplined siloed organization, at least from a production lens, where the producers relate to disciplines directly. I'm not a huge fan of this model. I'm not saying you can never use it. Many successful games have used it. I like cross-disciplinary product-oriented teams when I can get them set up when it does make sense, and I think that's a lot more of the time in game development. But that same idea runs true. It's just that then you have a producer over a multidisciplinary team of people that are trying to solve something about the experience that you're creating. Improve it, change it, whatever it might be. Make it better in some way. And when they are focused on disciplines, I actually worry this leads to what I call sub-optimization. Because they focus on, if I'm the animation producer, as in his example, I might then be evaluated, or I might use metrics like how many animations are produced as a way of evaluating whether I've been successful or not. And how many animations have been produced is not necessarily correlated with value produced by animators. And I think that's a difficult thing for a lot of organizations to grapple with. That just as he's describing the producers as a different layer than the developers, there's also this abstraction of like value is not the same as stuff created. And this is a thing that regularly confuses orgs, that just because you have significantly higher productivity does not mean you are producing significantly more value for the audience you're trying to serve.
Problem with a certain employee or a certain department and all these things. Now, going off this survey and the results of the survey about people being very disheartened by production is that most producers that are taking care of a department in games, at least based on my experience, don't really understand what the department underneath needs to do in order to make it work. And by that I mean, for example, I had producers that were working with me in animation, and they didn't know anything about animation, which then made it incredibly difficult for me because I had to explain why things take so long, or why we actually had to redo a certain thing, or why we have to iterate on a certain part, or why the implementation takes so long. And that is kind of like really tiring to me, because when you have to repeat yourself over and over again, you kind of expect somebody that is kind of like setting up the schedule, setting up the timing, helping you, kind of like pushing the department forward to at least know exactly what the department needs to be doing as a whole. And when they don't, it becomes problematic, right?
So this happens whether you're in that discipline structure that I described that he's talking about, or if you're in the cross-disciplinary structure. I have been the producer over like a dozen different disciplines at the same time. And it is not reasonable to expect me to have some decent understanding of all 12 of those disciplines. My job is to actually have a skill set in the spaces of what production does, systems building, leadership, influence, which cascades into things like goal setting and work system design and a bunch of other stuff like that. What he's describing is I, as the animation director, when I'm working with the producer, have to sort of walk the producer through what's going on. You shouldn't have to do that very many times. If he's doing that over and over and over, I'm wondering what's going wrong. Who's not paying attention? Now, maybe the animators who work with me would come back to me and say, like, Ben, we had to do that to you all the time. And that might be right, because if you aren't an expert in a field, you're more likely to forget elements of that, even if you're working with someone who's doing that all the time as part of your team, partially because, like I said, there's 12 different disciplines involved in the creation of a piece of content or whatever it is, like disciplines and subdisciplines. And I know a little bit about all of them, but I know a surface layer. I know enough to be stupid, not enough to be smart. And so I have to trust the team to help inform me. And I think that idea, what I didn't hear in him was I could talk to a producer and the producer trusted me to give him good answers about what it meant to be successful on the animation side. Now, again, this is made worse because if you're actually in an animation-specific space and the producer is over the animators, you better believe if that was my job, I would do quite a bit more work to try to understand the basics of how they operated, like what are the phases of development that we go through, blocking, splining, like, okay, and what needs to happen before we can start? Oh, we need a model and it needs to be rigged by a rigger, and a rigger is not an animator. Those are different things. And then we go through a series and then we get to polish but at some point in here, we can also hand off to VFX because often they're next in the pipeline, depending on your pipeline, or maybe not VFX, but audio. Again, depends on the game you're making, the style and things like that. You want to be able to see that high level so that when an animator comes to you and says, hey, we blocked in the animations and it's just not looking right or something, right? That you don't go like, what do you mean? You go like that. Okay, I can sort of understand that. Can you talk to me about what that means, right? What is that actually? How is that going to impact when we thought we might be done? Especially again, as animation lives in a pipeline of art disciplines or art subdisciplines, depending on how you view it. And I want to be able to communicate to those other disciplines around, the impact of this not going as well as we'd hoped. And so anyway, I think the producers for an animation department, if that's what they're doing, should be asking those questions, yes, but should also be learning and paying a lot of attention to the answers so that it doesn't have to be explained over and over again. And we can actually start having the value-focused conversations, which is what I want producers bringing into that. There's a distinction between, hey, I produce something and it's high quality, and I produce something and it's producing a lot of value. Sometimes something that's low quality can produce high value, or low quality might, maybe not, but like something that's sufficient quality might produce great value. Sometimes the difference between something that's high quality and super high quality doesn't produce much additional value. And this is hard because it sounds like you're saying, well, just make something lower quality. But sometimes you do make something that's lower quality so that the right things you can make higher quality. Because to make everything higher quality is one of the reasons so many times budgets and schedules so badly overrun. And the producer should be there helping ask questions to keep teams from overdoing the wrong work so that we can put all the extra effort into the right work that's going to have the maximum impact. And that we have time at the end of the schedule to do things like polish. So many times, like all the sort of polish or buffer time on schedules gets just eaten up before you're anywhere near polishing anything, because often because we estimated badly or whatever it is. And that's also a producer responsibility that they should be getting better at, because it does negatively impact the devs. Anyway, when he was describing that, I was like, I can resonate with the challenge he's having, and simultaneously I'm going like, I want you to be working with producers who are paying more attention to that and also trusting you more. That when you say, hey, this is something that happened and we have to go redo something, some aspect of our pipeline, whatever your discipline is, we need to iterate on this more, that they're not annoyed by that or somehow dismissive of that, so that you have to keep explaining it over and over, but they're like, got it, that makes sense. Let's talk about why. Let's talk about the impact. Let's talk about the trade-offs this creates in the schedule, and in our movement towards the goal we're trying to hit.
As a whole. And when they don't, it becomes problematic, right? At least from my experience. Now, the positive experiences that I had with production is when producers know what the department that they're actually leading or producing need to do, right? Because at this point, then they know that an animation takes this long for these reasons. Animation is hard. Implementation is hard. We need to build systems. We need to actually build all these things before we go ahead and do the stuff. And then it means that the producer and the head of a department can come together and actually better explain when things don't go well. Because that is when the crux of the problem happens. When things don't go well and production and the head of a department is actually clashing instead of working together towards getting to a certain goal, that's basically when production becomes a little bit of a problem, right?
Totally agree. And I would even say he's describing it as when things don't go well. Now, he did describe that as when the producer and the discipline lead, or whoever it is, start clashing. That is a problem. It's not because they can't disagree, but you want that to be a healthy conflict where we're like talking about trade-offs and thinking about the plan together, and really have, again, a lot of trust and a lot of belief in the other person's expertise and the good intentions that they have as it relates to the product. Whatever it is we're making, like whatever content, in this case animations, but whatever it is. So there's another version of this though, and I kind of want to reframe people a little bit around game development, that when something doesn't go the way you want, or when something doesn't go to schedule or to plan, we can go, because we made the plan, we can go like, oh no, something went wrong. And from a certain lens, that's correct. For me, I go, that's game development. So this isn't, you could frame it as wrong, but then everybody just gets annoyed at it. Or you could say like, yep, this is part of the iterative work of game development. That's it. So, this is not something that is actually bad or good or whatever, because ideally, the reason something went bad is because we're learning things. We've discovered something that's going to help us in the future. And if we continue to take the lessons from the things that don't go the way we expected and apply them back into the process or into the product or whatever, we will actually get better over time at an incredible rate. Like the compounding interest effect of like small improvements just stacking on top of each other as we continue to learn can make it so that the team that is willing to look at something that didn't go the way they expected and learn from it, doing that continuously for like 6 months makes them so much better at the end of those 6 months than they were at the start. And a producer is guiding that and ensuring that those improvement opportunities, those learning, the growth, the continuous improvement space, is also built into this and valued. And we're not just, grinding people into work over and over and over without allowing us to reflect on like what we can do better and how things can improve. Again, I also recognize a lot of devs have never experienced that type of producer and have more seen somebody who is I don't know, like a clipboard junkie going around and checking like, are you on track? Are you on track? Are you on track? Everybody give me your update, right? Are you on track with your thing? Good. Will you be done tomorrow? Blah, blah. And like, it's just not a valuable role. I mean, at scale, to his point, perhaps the coordination value is somewhat there, but honestly, it's just not a valuable role.
A certain goal, that's basically when production becomes a little bit of a problem, right? So that is basically what I wanted to say with this video, which is basically that producers are incredibly important. The bigger the project, the more important the producer. However, I think that in the games industry, once again, because we are young, we need to start getting more producers that understand what a certain department is doing in order to actually make the most out of that department and making sure that we are all working towards a goal.
The way he described it, I actually think I agree with him. If you are discipline oriented, like department structured, and you're the producer for animation, I don't think he's saying the producer should be an animator. I think he's saying they need to understand how animation pipelines flow and work. And I think that's true even in the cross-disciplinary scenario where you have many different disciplines at your disposal. You want to understand the steps that they go through to develop. And again, where are friction points? Where do blockers emerge? I was working on a team at one point where an animator actually couldn't check into the build because of the tool chain. It wasn't a great tool chain. They needed a designer or an engineer to do that for them. This created bottlenecks. And I needed to be aware of that because my job was to have work smoothly flowing through that system. And if an animator, every time they finish something, has to wait around for a designer or engineer to be available in order to get their work visible in the build, that's a problem. And they did eventually get that into a much better space. But it's I need to manage around that because now that implies that there's an interrupt for engineer and design around, in this case, it was animation and VFX and audio. And so it was really difficult being a designer or the key designer on certain assets or an engineer in the space because you would just constantly have to be doing this stuff. And you would interrupt whatever else you were trying to do. And I need to know that. I need to know how those things flow. I don't need to be an animator. I do need to understand this surface level view. And then I also need to recognize that just because I understand the surface level view, I am not an expert in animation. Just because I can talk through and use some of the right words doesn't mean I actually know what I'm talking about. You don't want to get producers that run up the Dunning-Kruger hill to where they think they're really good at this when they actually know the most superficial layer of it. But that's the layer that is important for them when it comes to having that whole system run properly. Another thing he said earlier is the larger the organization, the more important the producer or the producer role. This is an interesting one because at some level I'm yeah, there is a coordination aspect that production brings uniquely that at scale becomes more and more important because it's hard to have 500 people all going in the same direction towards a shared goal. And production is one of the elements in an organization that helps that happen if it's doing its job well. It's much easier if there's 5 of you. Simultaneously, I've seen this used to justify not bringing producers in till far too late. The way I frame this is the producer is there to help the organization at multiple different layers. And some of those layers, if you get the foundations wrong, will have consequence down the road. There'll be more problems down the road because you didn't have that expertise in early. So I just always want to be careful about people going yeah, the bigger the structure, the more production matters. Actually, the bigger the structure, the more I worry that production becomes a whole mess of bureaucratic middle management. And it becomes much harder for it to do well. So perhaps, again, more important for it to be skilled, but also huge chance of it being incredibly dangerous. And even in small teams, if you have a 5 or 10 person team, having somebody there who can put on the production skill set, the hat as a role, you want that earlier than you think so that you do set up a good culture, a good set of core systems that reinforce that culture, and a clear understanding of the goal state. Too often, producers are brought in when everything's already not great, and then they're asked to fix it. And the good ones will do that. But if you bring them in before that happens, then you might not have those big problems that need fixing. And those problems can be very, very costly, especially when it comes to alignment to the goal and culture and things like that.
Out of that department and making sure that we are all working towards the goal. Because otherwise it becomes incredibly frustrating. And I think this is why the survey, Animation State of the Industry, basically named production as the number one problem, or frustration, I should say, not a problem, but frustration for most teams when production is actually involved. So I'll link down below the survey or the video to the survey where we can find the results. And this is basically the end part of the survey. There's a bunch of slides there that explain that much better than I can right here. But I just wanted to share with you guys what a producer does from my perspective, my experiences, and also the positive and negatives of production. Lastly but not least, I want to give a shout out to one of the best producers that I worked with, which is Fawn Mead. So she actually came from an animation background. She was an animator herself, and then she got into production. And she worked with companies like Aardman and like the studio that worked in Klaus in Spain. And she actually managed the animation team incredibly well because she knows how animation is incredibly hard and that we have to actually try to come together to better explain where the planning is in animation. So we need more producers like that have a really good understanding, and not only understanding, but passion for the department that they might produce for. So you can actually get more velocity, more production, more of a better outcome towards a certain goal.
So here I am going to disagree. I think he did go to that place of, hey, this person had been an animator and that made them a much better producer. I'm not saying that's wrong. I have seen producers that come out of disciplined backgrounds. Like, I was an engineer and then I became a producer and then I was put on engineering teams and I could understand more of what was going on. I've had producers ask me, and you know what? People can disagree with this. I've had producers ask me, hey, I'm running an engineering team. Should I go learn how to code? And I always say, look, if you want to, if it's like a fun hobby project and you want to get a better understanding of it, absolutely go knock yourself out. If that's fun learning for you and that's something that's interesting, go for it. But from a professional perspective, the most valuable learning you could be doing, in my opinion, is developing skills of leadership, influence, and systems building. There's so much depth. Like the production role is a whole skill set all of its own, not a bunch of soft skills tacked on top of somebody who knows some hard skills of the people they lead. It is its own set of hard skills. And when people miss this, I think a lot of organizations miss this, they just think the producer is the person who has a bunch of conversations and is good at meetings or something. When what's actually true is the best producers are experts in production. And just like I wouldn't send an animator, I don't know, to go learn how to do concept art, unless if they wanted to and it was fun for them, I'm not going to send a producer to go learn animation. Because the thing I would send my animator to go do would be to like get better at animation. And I've said before, if I could get everybody to have one skill set in the team I'm on, it would be product thinking. It's not production, but it's product thinking. That idea of like, how do I think like a really good product lead, product manager, somebody who's like, okay, what is this? Why does it matter? Who's the audience? How could we meet that audience? What does it mean for this to be successful? Like, I want everybody to be thinking in that space. So that would be something I would send everybody to if there was really good training around it. But it wouldn't be like take an animator. Otherwise, it'd like have your animators go do animation training, have your producers go do production training. Problem is there's not a ton of production training. So I have some, check out my stuff, but yeah, that I want producers getting better at production more than I want them getting better at the disciplines of those they lead. I need them to understand a surface level of the disciplines they lead, but for them to be maximally effective, the most effective producers I've seen at actually helping teams succeed, were not good at doing everything that everybody on their team did. They were good at being producers. And that is there's a lifetime of learning possible down that path.
More of a better outcome towards a certain goal. I really believe that once the games industry gets to this point that all producers understand exactly what is needed from certain departments, we can actually get to a better place and we can actually get more games delivered on time and on schedule, because that is basically the biggest problem all the time. When the game doesn't come out on schedule or is not actually according to plan, but the game is still good, then there's a lot of pointing fingers to who has the fault and where should we be, and is it the department, is it production, there's a bunch of stuff happening that really shouldn't really be happening if we all come together and work towards a certain goal.
I don't think the goal is to get all those things out on time and on schedule. I think the goal is to produce something that actually has the impact you wanted it to have on the players you were trying to impact, or some other set of players. And so again, that comes back to that difference in how he frames production and how I view production. When you frame production as the point is to get everything out on time and on schedule, I actually think you disincentivize some of the positive aspects of what producers can bring to the table, because they will not identify problems that might disrupt the schedule, even though those are the important problems that might cause the game to fail, because they're being evaluated based on the schedule. And I want my producers, as people who see the big picture, I want them so badly looking at what are the major risks, not to the schedule, but to the product itself, to the game, to the engaging experience you're trying to create, to the players you're trying to serve. They didn't word it this way, but a lesson I got very early on in my game dev career was producers are there to make sure bad stuff doesn't reach players. I get it that not everybody would agree with that definition, and I don't consider it a complete definition. But it was almost like someone else described it to me as like QA does that at the end of the pipeline. They try to make sure bad stuff doesn't reach players at the end, and producers are trying to do that up at the front and all the way through. And you kind of meet in the middle with QA, right? Production and QA are two halves of the same coin, trying to make sure crap doesn't get out of a team. If all I care about is on time and on schedule against some list, I'm fine producing crap. And I get to say, I helped my team ship, and we got all of our stuff done 2 weeks early, and I produced 20% more stuff after making some changes to blah, blah, blah. I improved efficiency and this and that and the other. And it's like, yeah, but it sucked. Our problem in game development is not that we don't get games out on time and on schedule. It's that we make crappy games. And that is the more fundamental problem that I believe producers should be helping with, without becoming like egotistical know-it-alls about it, but that should be the frame of all the decisions that they're making. There's a goal here, and my job is to lead this group of people towards the goal, and the goal is a successful product, whatever that means. And it's not, if your whole definition of success is on time and on schedule, I think you're misguided.
That really shouldn't really be happening if we all come together and work towards a certain goal. So, I hope that was not too complex, and I hope you actually kept up with me through it all. Do let me know if you have any questions in the comments that I can maybe answer when it comes to my experiences, when it comes to production. And if you disagree with me, and if you think that maybe you have a really good experience with production, therefore you are the champion of production, or if you producer yourself, then definitely comment below and then let us know what your experience is. Because I have a strong feeling that because you are basically sandwiched between a rock and a hard place as a producer, obviously you must be more frustrated than anybody, like, in your surroundings. So I really
appreciate this about him. Like, again, I've obviously disagreed with some of the things he said, but I really appreciate the empathy he has, and that I see this actually more often with people that end up senior in disciplines and director roles and things like that, where they sort of recognize, like, oh, that. And I think this is true for everybody, to be fair. But to see the producer and go, wow, they actually kind of get crunched. They get smushed between the rock and the hard place inside of organizations frequently. And so I appreciate him calling that out. And, for me, I'm always, I do not want to deny anyone's experience out there that says, I've had miserable experiences with production. Because I'm like, yeah, this could be very true. Most producers are entirely untrained. Production training just doesn't exist. Like, even if you go back to college degrees, you can go get a degree that specializes in animation. You'd be like, oh, I'm an animator. I'm getting a degree in animation and art in game development, or whatever it is. It is rare to find. You can occasionally find courses. Is there a major in game production? Not very many. There's engineering, there's design, there's art. There's even like writing and other interactive media things. There are certain disciplines where there's just not anything. And production is close to nothing. QA is even closer to nothing. But most producers aren't trained, and they might be out there doing their best, but they might be out there causing a lot of harm because their best isn't good enough. And that's not an excuse for them. They need to figure out how to do better, but it's hard because if I want to learn animation, there's a million tutorials and a ton of courses and material and things I can do. If I want to learn production, there's not that much. It's why I'm doing what I'm doing. Because unfortunately, it's hard to see producers as valuable as an industry when many of them are less valuable than they should be because they don't quite know what they should be doing. So anyway, I appreciate his empathy for the production discipline and how they do get crunched. I think he needs to expand his definition of what a producer is, and I hope he gets to work with producers like that, because I think that'll help the projects that he's on be more successful.
Feel for producers. I really think that there is a better world out there, a better future out there for them. And if we work together and we come together, I think we can actually get there. So that is production in games. Kind of complex, but absolutely necessary, especially when you have a massive game. We need producers. So we just need producers that are better at understanding how games are made and what each department does. That's my opinion. I hope you guys enjoy it. And that's all I had for you guys. If you're still with me up to now, and if you're not subscribed.
All right. So yeah, good stuff. I actually, like I said, I mean, I disagree with him, but my disagreements are not surprising to me. They're very common. And I appreciate his empathy. I appreciate some of how he described it. And that like when things are going well, we're actually working well together, disciplines, all the disciplines, including production, working together. And I think he did call out some of the bad producers that aren't paying attention, that aren't learning from how their teams operate, that, endlessly try to make things happen faster. Like someone described as they always just push the go faster button on their teams. It is no surprise to me that many organizations, many individuals do not value production because most of them have not experienced what good production is. And, I think he did a good balanced take here. So yeah, you got my take around what he said, and hope you enjoyed this. If you did, hit subscribe. Cheers.